And news just in, popular tourist attraction Tekton Zoo has announced a series of cost-cutting measures in reaction to what insiders have described as deep-rooted financial problems. A statement issued by the zoo this morning states that ticket prices are increasing, but the animals will remain.
Hey people, I'm ZSH Plays, welcome back to Tekton Zoo, and yes, it's true, we have some serious financial problems in this zoo. We're losing money to the tune of about $65,000 a year, which is not good, and we need to do something about it. And one of the issues I identified was here. There is an enormous gap with no animals or anything at all for the guests to do really in between Tecton Coast and the Crocodiles and Caimans exhibit. So today we're going to fill this space in with a new habitat for the Galapagos Giant Tortoises. I'm hoping that'll drag some more guests into this area. So to be perfectly honest, the main reason that we're having such financial problems is simply that I have the guests in this zoo capped to 2,500. I have done for a very long time now, and that is simply to keep the frame rate up, so it's more enjoyable to play and so that my videos are nice and smooth. And the zoo's got to the size now where that just isn't enough people to finance it basically. Having spent the day adding all sorts of improvements to the zoo, gift shops, more food and drink stands, more education speakers, donation bins everywhere, all sorts of fairly boring stuff that I won't be subjecting you to. I also realised that this area, like I say, is devoid of anything interesting, and there's such a big walk. I'm thinking maybe that prevents guests from getting up here. So I'm getting pretty much no guests at all in the primates area, very few in the swamp that we just built. Mostly I think that's just because there's not enough guests in the zoo, but I also think potentially having this massive area with nothing in it is not helpful either. So I was looking at it and I thought, let's put a habitat in there. Looking at the size of it, the giant tortoises seem to be the perfect choice. I think the Aldabran giant tortoise was the first animal I ever bought in Planet Zoo on day one in the terrible zoo that everyone builds and then deletes after like 2 days. And then I had both the giant tortoises in London Zoo 1985, so they were not on my list of animals to add into this zoo. But as soon as I started building this, I realised how much I missed them. And I'm actually really happy that they are in this zoo now. So I'm building a nice, simple little habitat for them, give the guests a really good view of the tortoises, but also with a sizable indoor area for them for the winter. So the bit we're working on here is the indoor area. And the way that this is going to work is going to be similar to the Red Ruffed Lemur Lounge on the other side of where we are here. I'm going to cut viewing windows into the walls of the Grand Plaza so that people can see the tortoises when they're inside, which will be really useful for winter. And then the big outdoor area with the sort of curved walls that I've put in will be where they spend the majority of their time in summer. So there should be really good views regardless of the temperature outside. I noticed when I was making all the improvements to the zoo, because I had to have the zoo actually running rather than paused as it is most of the time, how infrequently it snows in this temperate map. I don't think it snowed once in all the time I played it, and I went through a good few years of in-game time. I was making all the adjustments and trying to see if I could save the zoo's finances. But it did get kind of cold a couple of times. So they will definitely be using that indoor area sometimes. And I had a lot of fun trying to get the paths to be as close to the walls as possible, because I really didn't want to delete the main path that comes in from the Grand Plaza. Also, just while I'm doing this is the latest technique I'm using to cover up holes in the path. I've always used the plaster pieces and then just coloured them so they're similar to the path, which is not an ideal solution. But now that they've introduced the concrete panels, those things are absolutely perfect for covering up tarmac holes because it's textured more similarly to the tarmac. So moving on, let's get the barriers in. So I'm going to be using null barriers all the way around the habitat. And then when we get to the indoor part of it, I will switch some of those out for some one-way glass so that the guests can look through into the indoor habitat, get the keeper gate in as well. And then we'll move on to decorating the inside of the habitat. So I'm going to put a water feature in, which I started off making ridiculously large. Don't know why I made it that big, but you'll see me make it a lot smaller soon. I'm trying out a new way of doing the concrete surrounding to the pool using these aquatic steps, just for a bit of variety. I normally use plaster panels, but I thought this might look quite nice. This whole habitat is influenced by the new Giants of the Galapagos habitat at London Zoo. They've just built a new home for their Galapagos Giant Tortoises. It's entirely indoor, all heated, but they've sort of built an outdoors indoors. So mine is actually outdoors, so it doesn't actually look very similar to theirs at all. But in the reference photo I was looking at, that's sort of how the little pool that they have in their habitat looked. So I wanted to try and replicate that. And then I'm going to use these arbor pieces for the fence. It's going to be quite a low fence so that adults can look over the wall, and then kids will be able to look through these if they're not tall enough to see over them. And while I finish putting that in, I should probably mention the nocturnal house, which is, I think, what you would have been expecting to see this week. That is still under construction. It's an absolute beast, and it is taking forever. I have almost finished the outside. It's taken a lot of building and then tearing down and then building again. But yeah, I've almost finished the outside. By the time that this video goes out, I should be well on my way with the 3 habitats that's going to be inside it. So hopefully next Saturday we'll see the Nocturnal House episode. Anyway, let's get back to this build. You can see me using the Archer for scale there as well. That is on the workshop, the Angry Archer. That is absolutely invaluable for scaling up your habitats. It's the exact same size as the in-game guests. So if you want to know if guests are going to be able to see over a wall or not and things like that, that is what to use. You can see the back of the sea lion habitats in the background there, which I've coloured green so it's less visible. But I'm going to put some more trees and things like that in to hide that. And I mentioned that this was influenced by the new habitat at London Zoo, and I have just stolen their name wholesale. You know I love a ridiculous name for a habitat, and they've already created one for these guys, so I figured I'd just steal it. So we're just going to put the sign in here, which I really like. I think this is one of my favourite signs that I've done, using the in-game fonts and the in-game sign as well to get different text sizes. And now we'll make the viewing windows for the indoors part of the habitat. So I'm going to put some square viewing windows in here, just using a load of the window pieces sort of copied over each other to fill in the space so the window's exactly where I want it. We'll get a couple of those in, and we do get a lot of guests in the Grand Plaza, with it being the sort of central hub of the zoo. So we get a lot of people stood there, as well as in the main viewing parts of the outdoor area. So I filled the whole habitat with sand, and now I'm going to fill parts of it in with grass to make it look nicer. The tortoises are pretty easy about what sort of brush you use to create the habitat, grass, sand, etc. So you can have pretty much free reign there. And then we'll put some enrichment items into the habitat and cover up some of the parts of the zoo that were never supposed to be seen, like where this mulch extends under the wall. When I designed this, it hadn't occurred to me to actually use parts of the surrounding wall for the Grand Plaza as a habitat, so I didn't pay much attention to what it looked like on the inside. But we can cover that up with these plaster pieces, and that's the indoor part of the habitats pretty much done. So we'll move on finally to all the last little touches that are needed on the outdoor part of the habitat. So a few more enrichment items, and then onto the planting. So sometimes when you put the enrichment items in, it kind of screws up the terrain, so I've just smoothed that back out there. Get some rocks in. Obviously can't make a habitat without rocks. There's actually not that many rocks in this habitat because I didn't want to take up too much of their usable area. They've got a pretty sizable hitbox, these guys, but obviously I don't want it to look barren either, so I'm concentrating mainly on plants and things like that that don't have a hitbox. So around the edges we've got rocks and some of the bigger plants, and then we're going to use a load of smaller plants and grasses for the rest of it. I put some vines over the doors because I thought that looked kind of cool. And same as last week, I'm using the new hinge piece, which I love, to act as a sort of attachment point for where these vines are going to go on there. Just a nice little detail. I love these vines. I'll use them in pretty much any habitat that I have an excuse to use them in. And we'll just add a little nettle poking out of the wall. I love stuff like this with the cracks in the pavement and the moss. I had a comment, I can't remember who it's from, saying that with all the decals I was using, they love the clean look of my zoo and they don't want me to cover the habitats, etc. in decals. That won't be happening. I did go a bit decal crazy with the Arctic fox aviary because it was supposed to be a building that had been sort of here from the early days of the zoo and then cheaply retrofitted for the foxes. But for the majority of the habitats, we will still be sticking with the pristine white concrete look that I love. I'm just going to be using decals for the odd detail here and there. And that is the Galapagos Giant Tortoise habitat done. So let's get the tortoises in and I'll talk you through the outcome of my efforts to save the zoo's finances. So with all the improvements that I made, including this habitat, I managed to reduce the losses from 65,000 a year down to about 20,000 a year. And eventually I just had to bite the bullet and increase the guest cap by 500. So we now have 3,000 guests, and those two things together combined have got us back into the black. So we are finally not losing money anymore, and we will not have to close the zoo. Although I have sacked quite a few members of staff, I'm afraid. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I will see you next week.